Step into the past with me, where the untamed lands of Montana were shaped not just by the vast skies and rugged terrain, but by the hands and hearts of characters who walked this earth with purpose. At the Second Crow Agency, outside present-day Absaroka, Montana, history wasn't just made, it was built, brick by brick, story by story, by individuals whose legacies echo through time. Today, we unveil some of the untold tales of those who were the very essence of this place, pioneers, leaders, and visionaries. Welcome to the Big Fat Podcast, and episode number 3 of our They Gazed on the Beartooths series, where we honor the spirit of the Second Crow Agency through the lives of some of its most influential figures. Brought to you in collaboration with the Museum of the Beartooths and our generous sponsor, Pinnacle Property of Montana. Now, if you've ever felt that you were born in the wrong time, then go ahead and hit that like button. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and share this episode with your history-loving friends.
Why did they call him Colonel Norton? Like, why did he get that name?
It's the same thing with Colonel Allen.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more because they were leaders rather than an actual colonel. Leaders in the community kind of thing.
Because
it was a nickname.
Because he was in the Army?
Well...
Or what was it? Not Army?
And it's interesting that in the paper, they called him Captain.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so... Yeah, I don't know why there's inconsistencies there about his little nickname.
Either. Well, but isn't there documents everywhere else that they're calling him Colonel? Maybe it was just a misspell in the paper.
Could be. People didn't know the difference.
Spelled it wrong. Well, whatever. Run it.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like Rosa Payne. We're like, just kidding. Run it.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting about these guys here. So what we're talking about then is some of these characters that were tied to the Crow Agency and the early development of the Crow Agency. So let's start with, since we are talking about Norton then. Norton was here first, right? We got some info. I'll rattle off some quick info on William Norton. December 24th, 1847, he was born and near Clayton, Illinois. And he enlisted at 16 in the Union Army. And he was in Sherman's March to the Sea. And then he came out here, worked on tried to get a farm going. And after the Civil War, tried to get a farm going. Grasshoppers wiped him out the first year, and then he ended up moving over here. So how does he plug in with the Crow Agency then? What's his involvement there?
I'm going to bring out a photograph that we published in the book that Patty Hooker Molinaro wrote for us. This is a photograph of the employees that we found that Frank J. Haynes, the Yellowstone Park photographer, did at the agency. And Patty, this was photographed in 1881 and was labeled as the employees of the Crow Agency. So in the center, seated at the bottom, is the Agent Keller, A.R. Keller. There's 2 kids sitting on the ground in front of him. We kind of believe that those are his kids, and the lady to the right of him in the photograph is his wife. We're not positive on that. We know she was here for a while, but in reading some Keller information and letters, we know that she didn't like the Wild Wild West and went back east. But we believe this is her in this photograph. And there's another woman in the photo seated on the other side of Mrs. Keller, who we believe is Mrs. Keller, that we believe is the school teacher. And then on the far right, seated, is Colonel Norton. And he is holding a carpenter square, which we think that's really interesting because we know Haynes used costumes, for lack of a better word, to have people wear. And you can see that some of the things that he had some people wearing in other images at the agency are in other images that he took. They're beaded clothing that you can definitely pick out. But anyway, so in this particular photograph, Norton is holding a carpenter square. So we believe he probably did some work on helping build buildings or whatever at the agency, or repairs or whatever. And then, so that's kind of a younger image of him.
Okay. Yeah. I'm trying to picture at what time, or do we have a date on that photo?
1881.
1881. So he's been out here now for a while. He was actually, he kind of homesteaded where current Columbus is, and he owned pretty much all of this land.
Yeah, 160 acres or whatever.
Okay. And so by 1881, I think the city of Columbus, which was Stillwater at that time, I'm just saying, would he have kind of attained some level of wealth by that time? He started to sell off parcels and things here. And so
He was 34, so...
Yeah, and we think he built the house in about 1899. So not sure exactly where, he could have lived at the agency because, like we said, the Adobe Town buildings were for employees.
So I wonder, the little reading I've been able to do on him is that he did, contribute a lot. So I'm kind of wondering, is he just there? Is he a worker there at this point, or is he actually kind of volunteering or...
Well, all the movers and shakers at the time are working at this agency. So, trying to... Alex Hundley is in this picture. He's on the far left. Second row is Tom Kent, far right. So he's right behind Norton. And Tom Kent's holding a curry comb, a square curry comb. Some kids, when I tour kids through the museum, they think it's a paintbrush because of its rectangular shape, but it's got a handle. But it is a square curry comb. So we believe at that point he was working in the livery at the agency. And
it is kind of interesting that these guys are like holding props.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, to maybe suggest what they're doing there, but there's no information on that.
Yeah, like, hey, everybody just grab something and act like you're doing something.
We know some of these are correct. Then Hugh Campbell is next to Tom Kent, who was also a mover and shaker in the Columbus area. And then Horace Countryman's in here.
What's he holding?
Nothing.
No whiskey bottle?
Yeah, nothing?
No. Like I said, Alex Hundley. And then centered in the center, in the back row, is a guy with a white apron, and he's holding a butcher knife. And we know he worked at the slaughterhouse.
Yeah. Which we talked about that before, right? We know
Yeah.
where the footings are of the slaughterhouse.
Right.
Okay.
And then there's a guy next to Tom Shane who is holding a hammer, and he's got some half shaps on, so we believe he's the blacksmith at the agency. So those are the only ones that are, Norton, Kent, Shane, and then the blacksmith, that they're the only ones that are holding anything. But these guys, some of these others that we don't know who they are, they appear in other Frank J. Haynes photos that were taken at the agency at the time. Like I said, in the clothing that Haynes packed around with him or whatever. So, and this photograph was taken on the interior of the agency compound, and became very helpful for us in the whole story of the second agency, because we have the bricks, as I mentioned before. So we could take measurements of those bricks, and then we could count the rows in the photograph of the bricks and figure out the dimension of the building and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, these guys standing there holding, a curry comb and, all the little props. I mean, could they even fathom that 100 and something years, 140 something years in the future? Like, people would be sitting there analyzing that photo about what they're holding, what their roles were.
How many bricks are there?
Right?
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing, yeah. Thank goodness Haynes took those photos, because they're some of the few.
Is Haynes, do we know anything more about Haynes? Is he just a guy passing through, taking, contracting for photographs, or does he live around here?
He came from Minnesota.
Okay.
So, yeah, he was hired
He's just coming through
Yellowstone
okay.
to be their photographer. And so as he traveled on the train from Minnesota, he would stop off and do photos on the way.
Wow.
So just thank goodness he did here, because like I've mentioned before, we don't have a lot of photos of the agency site. So, yeah.
And Tom Shane, tell us a little bit about Tom Shane. He wasn't really on our list this morning, but he seems to be, we got things.
Shane Creek.
Yeah, we got things named after that guy.
Yep.
And so I should try to do a deeper dive on him. It's interesting like to know more about him.
Well, I have a question of all these guys, right? So Countryman. So I know it doesn't necessarily have to be, but was Countryman Subdivision, was that his land? Shane Creek, was that his land? Like, are we talking like these are what they owned?
Yes and no. So Shane owned from his property was from Fireman's Point. So right when you turn on Countryman Creek down to Fireman's Point to the south.
Okay.
So the homestead was down Wagon Trail.
Okay.
And down next to the Stillwater, where Tom and Barb Winkle live.
On the other side of the highway.
No, it'd be on the west side of the highway, yeah.
Yeah.
But their property went up Shane Creek.
Oh, okay.
Onto the other side, the east side of the highway, too.
Okay.
So from what I've seen, they had about 320 acres there. So Tom Shane is an interesting character, too. He married a Crow woman. Her name was Sarah. I don't know what her Crow name was, but that was her allotment. And they had several kids. And in fact, I have a photograph of that family in this book as well that was taken by Frank J. Haynes.
I'll put a cleaner shot of that in there, but there's also Colonel Allen is in that same photo.
Yep.
To the right, I believe.
Yep. He's standing in the back with the flat top hat. Several of Tom and Sarah's children are in this photo. There's also a guy standing in the door that we don't really know who he is for sure.
Just an original photo bomb,
Yeah, it was, definitely.
This guy just...
I can't wait till, you
pack.
can just take a picture and face recognition's going to tell you who all these people are.
Right?
Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, and we believe the cabin that they're in front of was at the agency on the west side of the highway down on the Rosebud River bottom, where they did some archaeology work, where they found the glass scraper that I had mentioned and that kind of thing. So this cabin, same cabin, is in a few other Haynes images that he took at the time, but we don't know who some of the people are.
Yeah.
People were interested. The photographer's here. Let's go over and see what he's doing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Right?
yeah. That had to be such a curiosity thing when that guy showed up tromping that thing around. I mean,
I can't remember what movie it was, but there was a movie I watched where they were shocked and stunned to see this thing that, and it would do their big flash, and people were just wanting to know what this thing was that this person was using.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he would explain it and then show them.
Yeah.
I don't know how they did this too, but have you seen there's these old movies? I don't know, not really like a big movie, but a film or a video. Now they're videos of factory workers in England in the 1800s. And they must have just set a camera up in the road. And as people were like getting off shift, and I mean all ages, kids and older people, and it's just all these working class people leaving this factory. And they set this camera up and they're just walking by it, and they've cleaned the footage up so well. And then there's these kids that just stop in front of it, and they just kind of hook their thumbs in their jackets, and they're all just standing there looking at it for a minute. Some people, it's so interesting because it is so like today. You'll have the people that are going to stop and whatever, and then there's other people that are like, I'm not going to give that attention. Like, I'm not even going to act like I'm interested in that. And you sit there and you watch all these people walk by it.
And where was this at?
It's in England in the 1800s.
It's interesting how people don't change.
Yeah,
they don't change.
right?
It's a human nature thing.
Yeah.
You're like, and then there's like the kid who's kind of showing off and and
Kind of like when they have the broadcasters, filming something out in the middle of
live,
the street.
Yeah.
You have the same people, they're getting somewhere and they don't care and they're just got something else on their mind, and then you got those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just fascinating. So same thing in these photos.
Yeah.
Somebody was just there hanging out.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that they took them in front of the same place or whatever. He probably didn't even have to ask them to come over.
Right. Well, in the employees' photo, they took five Indian chiefs photo in front of the same location in the center court of the compound. So, and then there's 2 images of the Shane family in front of that cabin, one with the guy in the door and one without him.
Huh.
So, and then there's another image of 3 or 4 men, one of the guys that is peeking out the window in this image, and 2 or 3 other guys. And they're the ones wearing the beaded
I think it's
clothing.
funny, the one with the guy and the one without, because you're always like, Uncle Jim, get your girlfriend out.
Yeah. We're going to have to get rid of this one later.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, I'll just take another photo.
And Colonel Allen, he seems to photobomb a lot. He is in random
Yep.
photos. The guy was just around.
Yep.
I think that guy deserves a whole mini series on just him. I think that guy was an interesting guy.
Well, Jim Annan did in the newspaper. Every week he had a column. Allen did.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We have all of those in a file at the museum. So you wouldn't have to go through the newspapers. You could just go sit down at the museum and
Go through the original newspapers.
So what did this
go through a file.
Oh, I see. Oh,
Because we
wow.
copied them all.
What
wow.
did Colonel Allen do?
Excuse me.
Yeah, let's dip into Colonel Allen.
Well, Colonel Allen is an interesting guy. I don't know a lot of his prehistory to Columbus, but we know, well, there was a book written on him, and there were only 200 of them printed.
That's incredible.
And it's titled, and I don't know how you pronounce this correctly, but his first name was Jirah. So I'm
Jirah.
Jirah or
Yeah.
Isham, Isham is his middle name, and Allen, Allen. Montana pioneer, and this was put together by his niece, and
And where did you get that book? I mean, do you guys have that book then at the museum?
yes,
Okay.
yeah, and we're not like the library where you can check out a book,
Of course.
but you can come and look through this book, and I would thought 200 copies printed, and this is number 59.
Wow.
So it's a tribute to Uncle Ike. So Ike must have been his nickname, but the author is his niece. And it goes through his ancestors, his early life. He must have been at Fort Pease for a while in 1874-75. His Black Hills, time in Black Hills, his scouting days. And as you can see, I have many little sticky notes.
Well, how did he, I mean, he was in all those places. How did he make it to Columbus?
Yeah, go ahead if you.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I believe that he arrived at Fort Benton is how he got out here, probably by steamboat, I believe in the 1850s. I might be completely off on those dates there, but he was pretty early out here as well. And he, as far as the other little things I've been able to pull up on him, is that he was when they were building Fort Pease. He was the guy bringing in wild game. He was hunting for them.
Where is Fort Pease?
Fort Pease, I'm not exactly sure the location. They talk about it a lot in the Montana column, the March of the Montana column. Lieutenant James Bradley writes about Fort Pease, that when they got there in 1876, that Fort Pease had actually been destroyed.
So it was in Montana?
I believe it was outside of Billings, somewhere to the east of Billings. And that's just my guess on that, based on the description of where they were talking about. And I don't know much more about Pease, but there is a photo of him, and they gazed upon the Beartooths on Pease. I haven't done a deep dive on him yet, but I guess he was a frequenter of Columbus, or at that time Stillwater, as well. But it sounds like Colonel Allen did some scouting even for General Miles. It seemed like everybody did a little bit of scouting for General Miles. Luther Kelly, John Johnson, Liver Eaton Johnson did. Bill Hamilton did. They would have, I don't know, I guess these guys would all just ride out there, and I don't know how official they really were, but some I think were very official, and some of them were just riding along, or just along. I don't know who was officially on payroll or anything, but in different sources I've read that many of these guys were along with General Miles in the kind of the cleanup after the Battle of the Little Bighorn, when they were, if you want to call that cleanup, it was we're going to now just track everybody down, and we're going to put everybody onto the reservation. So he was a part of that as well. And the other thing I found too is that it said that even though he had lots of friends, and I think this is from Jim Annan, was stating that he didn't ever enjoy like any type of romantic relationships. Like he was just a single guy who just was around, and not just around. I think he was a very respected guy in the community, though. He also had a store. Did he have a store there at the Crow Agency?
Yeah,
Colonel Allen did.
He did run the store there. I was just looking at his book here. He came to Fort Benton in 1862.
Okay.
So he was born in 1839.
Yes.
So he was
December 20th, 1839.
Fort Benton's a ways away from here, though.
And yeah. In Buffalo, New York. Yep.
Yeah, from Buffalo, New York. But those guys followed to where the action, for the lack of a better word, was going on. And this area is where things were going on during the agency time. But, yeah, so he spent time in Fort Benton. He was... Let me see, where did I find that? He was near Fort Peck. I mean, these guys were all over the place.
They got around a lot, yeah.
Yeah, they were really looking up, seeing what was going on.
He
was in Bozeman by 1870.
Which is weird because, I mean, Fort Peck, Fort Benton, those are, I mean...
Yeah.
Right?
Montana's not a small state,
No.
and those are all over the state.
Imagine that. They're just on horseback.
I mean, I don't even like driving that far.
Just driving in general, right? You're just like, I don't even like, I thought you were going to say driving for a certain distance or time. You're like, I don't even like driving.
I don't like driving, like, Fort Peck's a long ways away. I don't like driving that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty amazing, though. These guys were in the saddle.
Yeah, they don't care. I'm going to go to Fort Peck.
Yeah, and
Let's
it took
go.
them days,
Yeah,
weeks.
let's just go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then he also worked at the Crow Agency on Mission Creek, too, before he came here. So, see, he followed but ended up staying here in Columbus.
He actually, he was friends with a lot of the Crow, like just,
Oh, yeah.
and I can't remember any of their names. Do you remember any of the names were there any of the Crow that he was particularly friends with, he spent more time with?
That I could not answer. I just know that, he was a salesman. I mean, he had the store there at the agency, and then he had a store on the block that the Chinese restaurant is just a couple doors down from there. And that building isn't there anymore. But he had a store there where he sold Native American things. And we have a photograph of him in our collections of him in his store. So that might be something that you want to include on this as well. But
that store was there actually for years. I think it was. He was just known to be there hanging out into his older years.
Yeah, and he died, I want to say
1928, I believe.
Yeah, the end of the 20s. And he was just you'll have to read some of those articles that are in the paper, because every week he wrote something.
He wrote something about what was going on, or he wrote it about himself?
Both.
Yeah, he actually wrote the obituary for Bill Hamilton. It is a full page in the Tri-County News, I believe, in 1908. He was very close friends, and he's buried right next to Bill Hamilton at the Mountain View Cemetery here in Columbus. When I found Bill Hamilton, I was like, who is this guy? Like, Colonel Allen. There's this just a smaller headstone there. I thought, oh, so this some military guy. Then to come find out,
No, just kidding.
Just kidding. Yeah, just kidding. But it's so interesting that he's buried right next to him. And he was really close friends with Bill Hamilton. And it sounds like, I read Bill Hamilton has his book of My 60 Years on the Plains, but he writes everything up to his time here in Columbus. He stops. He just mentions that he settles down here in Columbus. He spends the last 20, 30 years of his life here in Columbus hanging out, and Colonel Allen, I think, spent much of that time with him. And Colonel Allen was actually, according to Jim Annan, very kind of upset that he wasn't mentioned in Bill Hamilton's telling of his time in the West, and that Columbus wasn't mentioned. And his feelings were kind of hurt over that. And so it'd be interesting to read the book about Colonel Allen. I would really love to dip into that to see what is mentioned then of his relationship with Bill Hamilton in there, to see if they reciprocated, or did he just get, I don't know. So.
Yeah, and it's this book is, it's got two different index. There's an index of names, so you can go and find. Well, I was just going to look to see if Hamilton is. Yep, William Hamilton's listed in 7 or 8 pages. And then also there's an index of places where he was.
That's smart.
Yeah. I mean, it just, Billings, Bozeman, Absaroka, Baker's Battleground, Benson's Landing, Chico Hot Springs, Columbus, Cook City, Crow Agency, Deer Lodge, Fort Benton, Fort Buford, Fort C.F. Smith, Fort Custer, Fort Ellis. Fort Keogh, Fort Pease. A lot on Fort Pease here.
This guy knew.
Hunter's Hot Springs, Mammoth Hot Springs, Pryor, Red Cloud Agency, Red Lodge, Stillwater, Terry's Landing. I mean, Glendive, Hardin. I mean, it just goes besides many other states.
It sounds like he was just connected really kind of to everybody a little bit in one way or another. A lot of people knew him, and he knew a lot of people.
And just like the photo with the Shanes that he's in, there's an image of a lot of the Crow people down next to the Rosebud it'd been taken not too far from the cabin that Shane is in front of. Here's Norton laying out on the side with his hand like this, and
it was Norton or
Alan.
Okay.
You can pick him out because he's got his flat top hat on.
A smashed hat, like a smash. Okay. It doesn't look like it was really. It looks like it's just maybe it was a rounded hat that he smashed down. I don't know.
Well, they all wear different styles of hats, so
I'm a hat guy, so I
and it's more of the. And I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but more of the buckaroo style hat of today.
Yeah.
I don't know why that kind of flat brimmed.
Yeah.
Flat top. Yeah. But yeah, he kind of is everywhere. But you could really learn a lot about Colonel Allen. I mean, it just amazes me all of the Indian artifacts that he had in his life. And at one point in one of the articles, he's trying to sell items, and he'll say, just for an example, I can't remember each and every, but like the war shirt of so-and-so, and it just makes me wonder where that is. And in fact, last week after I left here, went back to the museum, and Tim McCleary was at the museum, and he's the cultural anthropologist at the Little Bighorn College. And he has been to every museum and seen every Crow collection. I mean, I take a picture of things and text it to him quite often to get his advice on things. Anyway, I told him that day, I said, sometime you and I need to look at this stuff that Colonel Allen wrote and was in the local newspapers, because he's got listings of things that were specific Crow people's items. And, there's no photographs, but maybe you've seen these artifacts in another museum, hopefully.
Right.
But maybe there's not a good enough description that would tell us.
Well, it's interesting if he was selling it. And he's a documentary, he kept records, that he wouldn't have kept a record of how much he got for it or who he sold it to or, whatever.
That we may never know,
Right.
Probably was in his store, but who knows what happened to all of that stuff.
Right.
Now, he did have a cannon, correct?
There was a cannon that was at the first agency. And it was actually in the Civil War. It was at Antietam and a couple other places. And so the military or the government sent surplus items to the agency, like uniforms and cannons and whatever. And so this cannon, came to the Mission Creek. And then when they moved the agency, it came to our agency south of Absaroka. And I can't remember the exact year, but that might be something you want to include in this.
We'll look that up.
Is we've got on loan to us from the Montana Historical Society a fragment of a cannon, and it just so happens to be the part of the cannon that would attach to because it'd be like on a wagon axle. If you could imagine that. Anyway, the part of the cannon that, I can't remember what that's called, but it has the number on it. So you could trace what cannon it came from. So that's how we know it
was. Like a serial number.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's why we know it was from the Civil War times. But
so that's on loan from the Montana Historical Society?
And
so you don't But that is at your museum?
Yes.
That's
it's
all
on
that's
display.
left is that little piece, or
Well, if we could ever get the Second Crow Agency property bought or saved, future archaeology, I bet, could find other fragments of that cannon, which...
Because it exploded, correct?
Yeah. In 1881 or 1883, July 4th, they used to fire that cannon, even at Mission Creek at the first agency, Fort Parker. And so Colonel Allen was the one that fired it on July 4th. And it blew up with 15 people standing around.
Most of them were Crow, I believe.
Did
Indian,
they die?
and nobody was hurt.
Oh my gosh.
15 people, Crow and other whites, standing around when he fired that, and it blew up. And the fragment that we have, I would guess it's probably a 3, 4, 5 pound piece. It's crazy that nobody was hurt.
Yeah.
What about the cannonball? Right? If they're shooting it, they're shooting.
Yeah.
There should be maybe a cannonball somewhere.
There should be a cannonball somewhere.
Yeah. Oh, I've gone down this rabbit hole on this cannon many times because they used to shoot a cannon off here in Columbus at the school. The school had one and the city had one. Well, where did those go? I have asked so many people trying to figure out if
anybody knows where the cannon is.
How
the
does
cannon
a
was
cannon go missing from the school?
Right, or the city.
That's
It's
weird.
in a basement somewhere.
But
I
there
don't
are
know.
people around here that remember that they used to fire a cannon. I don't know if it was before games, football games,
Yeah.
or whatever, but I envision it being the replacement of the one that blew up at the agency, and Colonel Allen ended up giving it to the city, or...
And that's the one you think that they had?
Well, I think he had a replacement after that one blew up.
You know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, my father-in-law has a cannon.
Maybe it's the cannon.
Maybe it's the one that was at the school or the city.
I'm going to have to ask about that now.
Hey, we found it.
He's out in...
See, I have been down this rabbit hole many times. I have talked to so many people. Well, do you remember a cannon? Do you remember this? Have you seen a cannon?
I don't know if... I'll ask about that because I don't know if it's something he made or where he got it from. I don't know. But he's told me, he's
Report
like,
back.
"Hey, let me know. We'll shoot off the cannon." And I'm like, okay. Yeah. Just haven't done that yet. How have I not done that? But
Yeah.
he has a cannon. So, and that's interesting. The school had a cannon. Okay.
Yeah.
My high school
Don't
had a
know
cannon.
why.
We had a cannon, and they would only fire it off. We were the Pirates, and they, like at homecoming or whatever, the team would run out, but it was like this big. It was like a little cannon.
Yeah, no, this
But
one
it was
bigger.
super loud. You could feel it. Even though it was this small, they would do something, however they set this thing off, and you just felt it. So I can't imagine a Civil War cannon that gets towed around on big, like a wagon axle, those big
Yeah.
cannons that you see.
So I should back up a little bit. The one that Colonel Allen fired at the agency was, from what I've read, in really bad repair. The wagon wheels were gone, and they would put it over the jackleg fence, and that's where they fired it from. So no wonder it blew up.
Right.
But Colonel Allen actually gave that fragment in, I believe, the year is 1921 to the Montana Historical Society. And there's a copy of the letter that I have in the exhibit as well. He telling that story of it, blowing up. But I just envisioned when I heard that the school and the city both had cannons that maybe Allen had something to do with them being there.
Wow. Interesting times, interesting guys.
Yeah.
Missing cannons.
Yeah. Like I said, history, it just makes me want to know more.
Well, I think you should probably talk to your father.
Soon as we're done.
Today. 2-day. Like, where'd you get that cannon?
Wouldn't that be weird if that he's like, oh, the city had it for auction one time and I just bought it.
Or the school.
Well, that family, I mean, my in-laws,
They've been here
They've
for a
been
long
here
time.
they've been here
forever.
for a very long time. And I don't know. I don't know how he has a cannon. So maybe it's
Maybe you
related.
could just convince him.
Is it big, small, or do you know?
I don't know.
You should just convince him to just relinquish that over to the museum someday.
Yeah.
And you can just, here it is, the cannon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I say, it could just be one that he built. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of guys around here who just doing stuff in the shop. I don't know. I just remember he's brought it up
Yeah.
with me about this cannon, that he has a cannon. And I'm like, you have a cannon, huh? I'm like, he's like, yeah. But I can't remember the whole story, but I think he's like, oh, yeah, we shoot it. We fire it off. But then I can't remember what he was saying, something about it.
I could ask April right now. Hey, can you talk to her?
Yeah, you should.
Text her.
Yeah, check with your dad on his cannon.
She probably knows where it came from. This whole time she's known.
Yeah, she probably has. And because it's weird stuff like that where I'm like, why didn't you tell me this sooner?
Well,
She's like, I didn't know. I don't know. I didn't think about it. And I'm like, your grandma hung out with Jim Annan. Why? And I just bought this book at the museum, and you have a first printing with a paragraph written from Jim Annan to your grandma, and it's been on our shelf. I'm like, I don't know. Can I get my money back at the museum? And I'm like, no, I was just kidding about that. But I was just like, I literally bought that book. And she was like, oh, I think we already have that book. I'm like, oh, we already have that book? Not only do we already have that book, it has a handwritten note in there from Jim Annan. And I was like, oh, why didn't you tell me about this? She's like, oh, I don't know. So,
well, save that one
yeah,
and use the one you bought from the museum.
I do. I don't touch that
Because
one.
as much as you're going to be reading it.
I do. I keep it here, and I'm going through it, and I'm bending it in weird ways to take photos of things in there and use them. Yeah, I believe it was that photo I just showed you, that video of where he talks about Norton rewriting up the thing about the Custer thing. That was my phone, and I'm videoing that.
Yeah. Well, we have the
excerpt.
image.
Yeah, it was late, and I didn't want to bother you about it.
So, yeah.
The
I work at
museum
weird
wasn't
hours.
open.
Yeah.
Yeah, museum
I'm going to
wasn't
need a
open.
key. I tend to do my best work after midnight, it appears. So, no, that's super interesting. This guy was a character. I think he has writings too about, was it him? There's a lot of writings in They Gazed Upon the Beartooths, retelling the histories of the Crow. And I don't know, was that Colonel Allen who was also doing that? Or who were those writings from? Do you remember?
Well, there's poetry in the Annan books that Alan wrote.
Okay.
Because
course
he
there
was,
is.
he was publishing even in the paper poems that he did as well.
In
Okay.
your opinion, are they good poems?
Are you a poetry person?
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
But I've read a few of them because they are some that he's written about history. But some are just... And maybe all of them are some kind of historical thing that
I can't
happened,
get
but-
into poems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm better if they're short, but his are long.
So
Their pages long.
let's.
Yes.
I have a question. So on my little note card here, it says served as the last survivor of the Sioux attack on Fort Pease. What do you know about that?
I don't know much about that, but let me look in the trusty book here.
I'm going to have to look up more history on that Fort Pease.
Yeah. Where it was.
In the March on the Monkey, that's where I first kind of started to pay attention to it. It's interesting when you read some of these things in here. I'm like, oh, I've actually heard of that in this book or this book or something else. It's interesting.
Sorry to jump back, but here's some of his poems.
Yeah. See, my problem with poems as you're looking is that there can be so many different, you can have the poem that rhymes or the poem that has cadences or and I'm like, I can't get myself around a poem.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Do you remember in school when you were talking
Yeah.
about poems and how there's this poem and that poem and yeah.
You know, they are, you know, I think as with anything, there's certain art that you gravitate toward and certain art that you don't. And it's just an art that you either do or you don't. You know, I have appreciation for that type of art.
And I like to read, but poems are just poetry.
So how about I read one of his? And it just so
Go for it.
happens to be a visit to Fort Pease in 1877, and it's very short.
Incredible. Yes.
I rode along the valley trail, but met no friend or foe, or saw the flag wave o'er the fort, as it did 2 years ago. So there, once more, I rode within the old fort's burnt stockade, where still a few charred timbers stood, nearby where comadres laid. And going close beside their graves, there rose again to me the forms of those who lay at rest, but never more can see, only in memory.
Wow. So this guy was there when this place got attacked. It got burned down. Incredible. And then he just ran a store here in town.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, there's 20 pages of poetry in this book.
The guy had time on his hands. He did not have TikTok.
Well, I think it's one of those things too. If you are into writing it, you know, you start writing it, it just kind of flows. It's probably like song lyrics. The people that can write songs can
Yeah.
punch out poetry, no problem.
Yeah. Yeah, poetry was a big thing. You had time at the fire late at night. You had time, you know, when you were winding down. People, I read of a lot of people who kept poetry books or even just old writings of Plato and, you know, that
Light reading.
light reading. And some of this stuff, they was just in their saddlebags, you know, and the stuff that I have read where a lot of people, I told you before I used to read a lot of Louis L'Amour, but he mentions a lot of his characters, a lot of his people in his books have like Plato's lives in their saddlebag. And that was a thing for him. And I know he didn't just make that up. He did a ton of research on this type of stuff, but he mentioned that a lot, how these guys. Let's take a short break for this You Should Know moment, brought to you by our sponsor, Pinnacle Property of Montana.
You should know the Norton House. Colonel William H. Norton wasn't just any pioneer, and he wasn't a colonel either, but that's what his friends called him. Joining the ranks of the 50th Illinois Infantry, he was only 16 when he took part in Sherman's infamous March to the Sea. But his adventures were only beginning. After the war, Norton ventured to Montana, where he survived a harrowing 48-hour standoff against Sioux, Arapaho, and Cheyenne warriors. But he lost his first battle with grasshoppers and gave up farming for entrepreneurship. He co-founded a store with Horace Countryman, only to have it shut down by executive order for an alleged excess of whiskey sales to the local Indians.
This is a bunch of bull.
And joined a partnership in the historic Columbus Quarry. He became a correspondent for the Helena Herald, famously rewriting and sending on the first news of the Custer Massacre. He was pivotal in shaping Columbus, Montana, selling land for the courthouse at half price, investing in community projects, and building an antebellum-style home that stands as a testament to his enduring legacy. For now, you should know because the Norton House won't be here forever. But Colonel Norton embodied the spirit of the American frontier, from soldier to survivor, writer to real estate, and he was a cornerstone of Columbus's foundation.
Even though they were mountain men or they were considered, you know, just hunters, trappers, and just Western guys, whatever, a lot of them were actually very deep thinkers. A lot of them were well
there probably
educated.
wasn't a lot of like books. Yeah, I mean, you know, fiction. They just didn't read that.
Yeah.
Right.
So what they had is what they would read over and over.
Yeah, you're probably right as far as reading over and over. You only had so much room in a saddlebag during that time, and you probably
So
read
something
the same
that
book
was
over.
a deep thinking book is something that they would take with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Bible and
Yeah.
Plato.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think also the fact that the poetry is deep. It's when you're reading it, there's so many, you know, it's all about the game of not only just rhyming, and not all of them rhyme, but there's different ways of doing that art. So so that can be something you revisit. If you're going to have one thing that you're going to take with you, or a couple of books, maybe one of them being a poetry book, because you can spend time going back over those and figuring out the art of them or appreciating the art of them. So maybe that's something to that.
Or figuring out what it's saying.
Yeah.
Or figuring it out.
Yeah. Well, and some of them are difficult.
Yes.
Yeah, very difficult. So talking about Fort Pease, Allen in 1875 joined a party of Bozeman adventurers under the leadership of Major F.D. Pease and Paul McCormick. He was around here too, but he's a big Billings guy. And came down the Yellowstone in Mackinac boats and established Fort Pease at the mouth of the Bighorn.
Okay.
He passed by the site of Billings when they were no settlers from Countryman's Ranch to Glendive. So Countryman's Ranch was west of...
No settlers from Countryman Ranch to Glendive.
Yes.
That's a long way.
That's a long ways.
A lot of,
Yeah.
You have a hard time driving that today.
That's better than to Fort Peck, though.
But they were on Mackinac boats, so...
Yeah. Better.
Maybe.
Going down the river.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. Talking about Countryman Ranch as well. I was reading yesterday, and I believe it's in the Gaze on the Beartooths. I could find that. But they talk about, I can't remember his first name, but his last name is, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Hoppe. Is it Hoppe?
Hoppe.
Okay. So up there in that, because that's where I live, is up in that HOA. Anyway, there's a Hoppe road.
I'm sorry. The way they said, don't get me started.
Yeah. Anyway. I have to remind myself, I'm like, this is a historic ranch, like this property.
But that wasn't his ranch. His ranch was on the north side of the Yellowstone.
Okay.
Kind of where Jason and Holly Williams live. So if you go on the West Hill, they're between the river and the highway there.
So it brings me to my point, though, that this Hoppe, and there's a Hoppe road out there, okay? But they mentions that Hoppe had a house over there. And not a house, but he had...
trading post.
He had a trading post.
On Kaiser Creek, I believe.
You know what? It said south of the Yellowstone, up a creek about a mile. And I've brought that little building up with you. There's a little building there, and there's an underground. Yes, near that little building, that little cabin, is also right by it is a big underground cellar storage area that's caved in.
Is that where that cabin is? Is that the same kind of land that's like right next to you? That's
it's just all community property. Okay, and so when it was describing Hoppe's place. He was south of the Yellowstone, up a creek about a mile. I was like, I'm wondering if this could go back to him. Like, this place is super old. And the cellar area, I'll have to show that to you sometime when you come out there. We'll go look at that, because the cellar area is all caved in. You can walk to the entrance of it and kind of look in there, but the dirt's all caved in right there beside that little building.
Is there doors on that cabin? Or
yeah.
They're all ripped off?
It's kind of boarded over. It's kind of closed off a bit, but I can't remember. It's been a long time since I've
just because they don't want anybody in there.
Yeah, probably so. But that building is old, and I was just kind of thinking by that description that
maybe.
Have you been up there? Do you know where it's at?
I'm not sure. No.
Okay.
It's not very far from your house?
No, not very far at all. I'll bring it up on like Google Maps or something for you, or I probably have a photo on my phone that I can...
nothing surprises me about this area.
Yeah.
Because all these guys were around here doing things, and...
Well, you know what I find? I was just sitting here thinking about it, because you were like, well, that's not really their land or whatever. It's interesting that somebody else liked history enough to name things.
Right.
And get the names right.
Right.
Like you said, okay.
Well, isn't there a Medicine Crow? Isn't there a Medicine Crow kind of off of Countryman Creek?
Yeah. Yeah, there is.
Yeah. I mean, Medicine Crow is a Crow Scout.
Yeah.
I bet you,
You know?
if you looked,
Or not a Crow Scout,
I mean, I'd have to
chief.
bring
Chief.
that subdivision up and look at all the roads, but I wonder if they're all
Oh, there's all kinds of names.
interlaced in there.
could be,
You know,
yeah.
because
There's
that's a
Dan-
pretty
then there's-
big subdivision.
There's Daniel Trail.
Yep, Daniel's Trail, and
So would that be Daniel Countryman?
Probably.
I didn't even think about that before till just now.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's I want to say is there a Gibson or a Gibbon? Like I'm like, oh, now is that
I
like
think there's a Gibson. Yeah, I'd have to bring up the plat map and look at it. I mean, you hear of all those names all the time because
Yeah, now I'm interested too, wondering who developed that.
could probably go back and see who developed it. I mean, it was a long time ago.
Oh, yeah. But
yeah.
because they had to have, named the roads and
Mhm.
everything, for,
Yep.
like, say, for history. So it's pretty cool.
Well, there's Clark Drive.
Clark,
Mhm.
yeah.
I don't know who Clark was. There's Daniel's Trail. I'm looking at that. Doan. Gibbon. It's Gibbon.
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 Mm-hmm.
Would that be
Mhm.
General Gibbon?
I would guess, yeah. And I bet Clark is,
General
because Clark came down the Yellowstone.
Well, there's Lewis Trail too, isn't there? So maybe it's Lewis and Clark.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Mm-hmm.
There's Hoppe. Haystack Coulee.
Yeah, Haystack's been, that name's been a long time too.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yep, there's Medicine Crow Road.
Mm-hmm.
We're just now figuring it out. Oh, look at this subdivision. That's pretty
There's-
Well, we've known Shane Creek, Whitebird, Joe Hill. Those are all for people that lived in the area way back when,
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, though, that in this subdivision, there's all these names of history.
Yeah.
Yeah, whoever developed that was a big history buff of the area.
That is really interesting. I'll have to show you that little cabin. I've brought it up with you many times because it's just...
It's the first thing I noticed when I drove out there.
Yeah.
I have not been in there very much, so I've been down to...
You got to go clear back in.
Yeah.
I
know where he
It's-
lives, but I have not been
It
to...
actually isn't
It
that
actually shows the cabin, and you can see the underground cellar.
bad. Oh, you can.
Yeah. So there's the cabin. I will show you real photos of it. There's the cabin, though, and right beside it is... I don't know if you could see that.
Yeah, I could see it when you were showing her. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't doubt there is... this whole area is just filled with things that relate to our history here.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of Countryman,
Horace Countryman. What was his association then with the Crow Agency?
Well, he worked on... We know he worked on the sawmill, but he followed the move because he was one of those guys that was trying to sell whiskey to the Indian people.
Yeah.
And he had a store, stage stop kind of thing.
I wish I had right where I found that at. I think it's in the Gazed on the Beartooths too. It mentions something about a contract for hay, that he provided for the Crow Agency, I believe.
Yeah, he was...
and whiskey.
He was busy.
Yeah.
They were all busy back then. Horace, to make $200-300 a day with the ferry, that's a lot of money today. But back then, that's huge.
That's really huge.
Well, he had six children, right?
Mm-hmm.
See, and Rosie Payne. Well, Payne was her name, but
Rosie Payne was the daughter of Margaret?
I believe so. It was Margaret Quinn. She married...
the Payne.
Yes. She ended up actually with somebody else, last name starting with an F. But that was her. So this is why every generation they just kept naming each other after naming their kids after each other.
Makes me
So it
confused.
wasn't this Rosie.
No,
This,
because that was Rosa,
yeah.
but it's
But if you go and look up Margaret Quinn and her daughter, she has a daughter, Rosie. And so she was a Payne. Margaret married a Payne. And she had a sister named Rosie, and she had a daughter named Rosie. And I think they just put her on the headstone as Rosa. But I think...
Well, Rosa may have been her given name.
Okay, so maybe...
But-
Who knows?
Yeah.
But that's what I'm asking. Do we know that that's
As far as what we can tell, I
the
think
headstone?
the headstone, I believe, is the Rosie or Rosa
So
of
somehow
Margaret. Her mom was
related.
Margaret, so it would have been Horace Countryman's granddaughter. So Horace Countryman.
Yeah, which here's what I'm saying though. In that in the paper when we talk about nonsensical things, right? That don't, I mean, why and then you have something like that, somebody buried out there, which, I mean, maybe that is to them back then was, I mean, they just buried people wherever they lie, whatever, but it seems just odd
Yeah, it is. It is odd.
that it wouldn't be even mentioned.
Well, and this is confusing because Horace married Elizabeth Payne.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's confusing in They Gazed on the Beartooths, too.
Yeah.
So did he just have one wife?
As far as I know.
And she had kids from another marriage.
And that's what I was thinking. It was Rosa,
Yeah.
was hers from a prior marriage. But then there's Rosie that she has as a kid here listed, too.
Yeah.
It's very confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't help that they just kept naming each other all the same names.
So he was basically the founder of Columbus?
Yes.
So how do you become a founder?
I guess you're just here first. Sounds like he and Norton were here first.
Yeah, and they started plotting the town. The original town site was Countryman.
So why isn't Norton considered that founder then too?
I think he's still considered a founder, would you say?
Yeah. Yeah.
But you don't hear of people
But he did the Norton edition, so I think Countryman was the first guy that started to plat out the town, and then Norton followed. Because there is a Norton edition, right, to Columbus.
Well, probably.
I'm not sure.
I'm
What do you
not-
mean by a Norton edition?
Well, on the plat maps they'll have like East Side edition. And,
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, I'd have to look. I don't know.
It seems like there is.
We could ask Stephanie or Shelley.
This is important right now. We're going to need you to get on this. Now that's,
Maybe it's right here in front of us, and
Oh, you have a plat map of the town.
no, but I have the
history of the agency.
of the towns.
Okay. Countryman platted at least 3 additions to Columbus beginning in 1891.
Who did?
Horace did. On my notes right here, platted at least 3 additions to Columbus beginning in 1891. Because the town wasn't really a town, was it? Until 1890 or something.
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I don't know that one either. Interesting little tidbit on Horace Countryman, though, is that when he was all about business. He had the first hotel here, and he had a lot of businesses.
Do you start platting a town after you've created a hotel or before?
I bet you the hotel was there before.
Yeah, I think so.
I think they were just kind of like, they just started throwing up a structure here or there.
He finally has 3 businesses. He's like, well,
we might as well make
might
it a
as well
town.
make a town out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. But when he died, they went through his stuff, and he had they have a list broken down of all of the items that they inventoried of his. His assets totaled $5,573.43. And that was according to an appraisal on March 19th of 1898. And
what is that in today's dollars? Do you know?
I don't. I wish I could. I don't know how to convert that. I'll try to look that up. But among the 400 items that they inventoried of his, among that was a barrel of high-grade whiskey valued at $52.50. A barrel of whiskey for $52. that $52 had to be like $2,000. $5,000. I don't even know how you convert.
5,573
43 cents.
in
1898.
1898 be valued at.
He'd built his hotel in 1882, and Columbus was not a town at that time.
No.
Not like an incorporated city or anything, or a town.
Oh, there's an inflation calculator.
What do you got over there?
Yeah. All right. Okay, give me that number again. 5,573.
73. Yep.
And how
43 cents.
43 cents. Start year, end year.
Start year 1898.
$211,723.86.
Really? That's incredible.
But I would have thought he would have been valued at more than that. I mean, that's a lot, but just because of like the ferry rides, if he's making $200 a day and he has a hay contract and he has all these different businesses going on, wouldn't you think like millionaire times then? I don't know. I mean, it was probably a lot of money then.
Yeah. But
just all the stuff he had going on, I just would have thought.
Yeah, you would think so, that possibly. I don't know. Maybe there was times.
Because that's all he had at the time of his death. That was his assets. That's what he died with.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I just would have guessed it would have been more.
I would have too. I was kind of shocked by that number, but then I don't know. Maybe he, I don't know. Maybe he had a lot of kids. Maybe he helped them out a lot. Maybe
they took what he had.
Maybe.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Interesting.
He had a $52 gallon of. What we should be doing is converting. How much was that in today's value of high grade whiskey?
$52.50. Oops. $1,994.37.
Wow.
$2,000.
Almost $2,000 for that barrel of whiskey.
Where did that go?
Yeah.
Yeah. They must have had a big party or something after he died.
Yeah.
Wow. That is historical. We're running out of time here, but can we dip into William White?
Yeah.
Because he was also one of the early, I guess you could call him an early settler here. And what can you tell us about William White?
William White is a really interesting man in the history of this area. I have a copy of his book as well, which is out of print. It's called Custer Cavalry and Crows, done by William Marcus. And as you can see, I use it a lot too. Whoops.
Yeah.
Because I've got all kinds of sticky notes. This is actually a photograph of William and his crow wife, Julia, and their kids, Willie, Mamie, and
I see a
Minnie.
Yep. And Ada?
What about Ada?
Oh, wait.
Well, why is Montana? Ada, Montana.
Maybe they were in Ada, Montana.
Oh.
I might have messed up there.
Yeah.
Or maybe is his wife Ada?
Let's see. Also born to this marriage were Charles, which was Frank, and Ada,
Oh.
which is known as Dolly.
Oh, yeah, Frank and Ada. There we have it.
Mm-hmm.
And she was the daughter of Chief Crookedfoot of the Crows.
Yes, and
His wife? Is that
Yeah.
what you're talking about?
Julia, yes. And there's a piece in here I'd like to read if I can
Yes.
do that. If I can find it here real quick. So Chief Crookedfoot kind of followed William around at the agency and set up his teepee near where William was living and he was working there and that kind of thing.
To keep an eye on him? Or?
Well,
He just
he
took to
had
him.
befriended him.
Oh, okay.
So it starts out in here, there were various likable Crow girls among my associates in those gatherings. Particularly, there was one who I named Jane. She was Yohonaho, which is Julia, special chum. One day an Indian told me that this girl Jane was about to be married to a certain white man. It happened that I was well acquainted with that white man, and it happened that I had heard him talk of his plans. I knew that his intentions were not honorable. I did not reveal what I knew, but I said to my informant, I think Jane had better wait a while. It appeared to me he went straight to Jane's parents and told them what I said. It appeared also that those parents construed my remark as meaning that I contemplated the taking of Jane as a wife for myself. This ensued general gossip, led Crookedfoot to make a special visit to me. I explained to him the whole situation. In order to give public notice as to my intentions, I invited Crookedfoot to bring his teepee and set it up near my cottage. With Yohonaho's home next door to mine, it was not long before we agreed that the time had come for me to take possession of her. This was in the spring of 1878. I was 26 years old. She was only 16. But in her serious ways, she may have appeared almost my same age. Within an hour after our mutual agreement, all of her personal belongings were transferred to my cottage. Now she was my wife.
Wow. That's an elopement.
Yeah, then he goes on, the Great Spirit, the most holy of all maternal officials, tied the bonds for that wedding. There was no human preacher then available for this purpose. 2 years later, there happened along one Reverend George Comfort, a Methodist minister. I got him to perform his ceremony and give us a marriage certificate. I gave my wife the name Julia. In fact, I had given her this name before we had entered into the original marriage. I had the agent change her name on the tribal roll. Thereafter, she was always known as Julia White. And this is a photograph of Julia. Very pretty lady. Wow. There's one other story about her that I'd like to mention.
Yes, please.
This is an old photograph of their house.
Oh, wow.
Here in town, which is the one with the rock with the sword
in the Stone rock
yeah.
house over here.
On the corner.
Yeah,
Yes.
they built that.
That doesn't look like that now.
No,
right?
No. Her allotment was just on the other side of the Yellowstone. So the yellow house in the trees was their first house. There's a photograph in here of that as well, where Blaylocks live.
Okay.
Anyway, they decided to move to town from the ranch. That didn't want the ranch life any longer, so he built this house for her in town. So she was pretty well thought of in Columbus. My wife joined the Congregational Church. The Ladies' Aid Society brought her into their work, in which she took a strong interest. She joined the other women of the town in their work during the days of the World War. No woman was more busy than she was at knitting socks and sweaters for our soldiers. In the course of her church work, there occurred a conference of congressional ministers. According to custom, private homes were asked to provide food and lodging for the visiting church leaders. One of them was assigned to our place. Somebody told him he was to be a guest where a Crow Indian woman presided over the household. This information was said to have chilled him, but some reassuring satisfied him with his assignment. When he came to our house, his manner was rather hesitant, but I encouraged him with a welcoming handshake. I then called my wife, and she shook hands with him. After some conversation, we escorted him to his temporary private abode, our best bedroom. Up to that time, he had appeared somewhat bewildered, not knowing what to say or do. But as we reached the bedroom, he suddenly broke out into exclamations of delight. He asked our permission to show the room to some of his brethren. We went out and rounded up 3 of them to bring them in and boast to them of his good fortune. The 4 joined in urging us to show them through the whole house. We did, and included the kitchen and the bathroom and every other feature of this place. Their expressions of pleased amazement amused us, and their repetitions of the situation in talk to the local people afterwards amused them too, for it was well known among these local people that in our town there was no more tidy housekeeper than Julia White.
That is so interesting.
Isn't that cool?
They had to go find 3 people to show the house to.
He thought, he heard, I'm going to go stay in the house of
A crow.
Indian
It must
woman.
be like a teepee or
Yeah,
something.
this is going to be really rough.
Coming west,
Yeah.
we're...
And then he finds out, it's like, this is a nice house.
And
I
it
gotta show
sounds like
everybody.
they had an indoor bathroom.
Yes.
That's amazing, too, that you're talking about the World War. We're talking 19 teens now.
Yes. And then it says, on a gloomy day in late December 1921, the Great Spirit took my wife from me. I could not content myself after that to remain in the same house where she had lived so agreeably together. So I moved to Crow Agency, be the current one. In recent years, beginning in 1932, I began serving as a guide to visitors at the Custer battlefield. My wife's original Indian personal name, Yohonaho, translates into "she sings many songs of victory." The name aptly describes her cheerful traits of character. Her naturally benevolent disposition brought her more friends than had any other woman in our town. Proof of this universal regard was made when, on that midwinter day, the longest funeral procession that ever had been seen in our community follows her body to the cemetery.
He speaks very highly of his wife.
Oh,
that
very.
he took. You know what I mean?
Well, it was a different time.
Yeah.
And Crookedfoot, her dad, gave him. So the other thing that chills me about these words right here, William White was part of the detachment that ended up at the battlefield, the Little Bighorn battlefield, after Custer and all his men were killed. And we have part of his diary, which might be fun to include some excerpts from that.
Yeah.
In this. But it gives me chills to thinking that he was a guide to the visitors in 1932. And he was there. He saw.
And he died in 1939.
Yeah. But could
so
you
that's
imagine?
Was at the end of his,
Yeah.
Yeah, but could you imagine going to the battlefield to learn about that history and actually have a guide?
It from him? Yeah.
Yeah, who was there?
Yeah, he was there, and also another part about that is, they showed up the day afterward and he was there. They recovered all the bodies, the remains. He saw the worst part of all of that.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like going to the Arizona Memorial and having the vets sit there, because they welcome them to come sit and they'll retell their story too. And it's kind of eerie. So it's very interesting. You can't even imagine what that would be like. That would be. But did they know? I'm sure he told them. Like, I was in this is what happened, this is where they
He could tell
stood,
them what the bodies looked like.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
because
yeah. He
they
was
were
there.
And not only that, it was such a grueling process to get the bodies, a lot of them buried, but also the wounded, to get them out of there. They had to evacuate these guys and to get them to the
and
steamboat.
just the sounds and what it, it's not just telling about it. It's what it sounded like, what it smelled like, what it looked like, that's crazy to have somebody to be able to explain that all to
in
you.
the 1930s.
Right. Isn't that just crazy?
When there's, movies and
Right.
telephones.
When
and
people knew what happened.
planes flying around. And, I mean, isn't that incredible? Also, he was with General Gibbon. Okay, he was... so he was at Fort Ellis. Okay, he was... which is over there just outside of Livingston. Between Livingston... As you leave Livingston, heading toward Bozeman... on the north side of the interstate right there it's no longer there, but that's where Fort Ellis was before you get up into the hills onto that pass right there. But he served there. He also served at Fort Sanders in Wyoming, but then Fort Ellis between 1873 to 1877. He was with the Montana Column, and he would have been a foot soldier. And when you read the Montana Column, they describe they left very early in the spring. And they left, and they were tromping in just waist-deep snow. They had below zero temperatures. It was incredible, the conditions that James Bradley writes about for these guys when they very first left, and that they weren't really in shape for this kind of a march at that time of year. Really interesting. But later on, he talks about how in shape everybody was. And it just wasn't a big deal, and how many miles they were covering. These guys walked from Fort Ellis to Bozeman, and then back all the way over here down to the Crow Agency, and then up, and they headed out to the east, and as far as they went up by Forsyth
there wasn't a highway to walk down. It wasn't like just a level.
Right.
These guys were not all on horseback, though. Many of these guys were all just on foot. And
foot soldiers.
Yeah, he hiked all of that. Incredible.
Yeah, yeah. And here's another little piece I'd just like to read about his time at the agency. The agent gave me a job of taking care of the agency stable, at butchering, and general labor. The monthly paycheck was more than I needed for my monthly support. A small cottage was assigned to me for my personal bachelor living quarters, and I moved into it. I was a frequent visitor, though, at Crookedfoot's lodge. So, see, Crookedfoot was a buddy of his. I attended social parties for young people at other lodges. We had delightful times in card playing and general conversation. I learned the Crow language to an extent that enabled me to communicate with them freely for all practical purposes.
This was before he was married?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean,
yeah,
to come from back east, come out here, and this whole lifestyle back then, and just be living at an Indian agency and befriending.
Yeah. And all these guys that we're talking, Tom Shane and William White, their descendants are still around. Not in Stillwater County, but I don't know if you remember a few years ago, there was somebody by the last name of Shane that was killed out of Fort Smith and was just left along the road.
Oh, wow.
That was a Shane.
Wow.
William White, one of his daughters married a Watt who had a livery stable here in town. And so, I mean, there's Watts still.
Well,
around.
anytime you have a Horace Countryman, 6 kids, he had 5 kids.
Right.
Yeah, you're bound to have
where
descendants. Right?
My daughter Jeannie and Jeremy live. That was Willie White's place.
Oh, really?
The barn that they tore down had Willie's initials in the concrete.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
All along the Yellowstone on that whole Flaherty Flat area, those were Shane kids and White's kids' allotments.
Mm. That's cool.
And then Julia's allotment. And then there was a little bit of space there. Well, Julia had quite a bit of property, but from Nellie's Corner to Fireman's Point or Countryman Creek Road, that wasn't part of her allotment. But then there was the Shane allotment. Then there was Joe Hill's wife was Crow, And their allotment is a lot where Beartooth Ranch is. Yeah, it was allotments just about all the way to Absorkey.
Wow.
And then where Wanda Wilcox lives was the Garrigus place, so that was another allotment. And then the Old Crow Agency site ended up being an allotment as well. And then where Rick Young is, that was the Landy allotment, and there's still Landys. There's so many Crow people that have connections to this area that, they may not know that. But,
Yeah.
If you went and looked at the names over on the reservation, you'll come across Shane. I can guarantee you'll come across Landys. You may not come across White, but you will come across Watt, because one of the daughters married a Watt. So that all these names are still there.
That's incredible. Nellie's Corner. Why is it Nellie's Corner?
Nellie Matovich. That's where she lived. That was actually the Weatherson place. That house was just torn down a year ago or so. That pink-colored stuccoed house right in Nellie's Corner. And John Matovich, that was his mom, Nellie, but that was the Matovich place. But Weatherson prior to that.
Wow. I'm so glad you answered that. I drive around that, or
Yeah.
My wife will say, "Oh yeah, you're by Nellie's Corner." I'm like, "Where's Nellie's Corner? Like, what are you talking about?" And she'd be like, "Yeah, da da da." And I'm like, "That's just a big curve in the highway. Like, it's not really a." Well, it's called Nellie's Corner.
Well, that's because you're not originally from here.
Yeah.
So.
I
Yeah.
know.
But
I try to fit in and know these things, and I'm like, "What? Why is that?" And she's like, "I don't know. It's just it." And I'm like, "Oh, so I'm going to go home and I'm going to look for a opportunity to just drop that."
we need to get Casey Olson in here sometime, because he does some great stuff teaching with the kids the place names of the area. Even the streets here in town. Mm-hmm. There was a street named for Hamilton.
Yeah.
First,
Okay.
I believe.
Right.
And second, I believe, was White.
Yes, and there was
and
Norton.
they changed it.
Why did they change them?
I'd like to know the same
They
thing.
changed them to the numbering, so it's
Yeah.
kind of a.
Yeah, but they're not changed. Like Annan is still Annan.
Annan is still there, and then Labby is for Norton's wife,
Oh,
and then Norton Street is right along one side of the courthouse, and
And what's Pike?
that is a good question. We've been trying to figure.
I mean,
that
most
one
towns
out.
have Main Street. We have Pike, and
Yeah.
I don't even know what that's for.
Yeah, I don't know that one either.
Yeah, it's hard to explain to people when you're trying to give directions, and you're like, "So Main Street? Well, it's Pike Avenue, but
yeah, it's Main Street.
The
but-
business district. Yeah.
yeah, because normally in a small town it would be Main Street."
Yeah. I know. It was very frustrating to me when I first started at the museum, because we're at the corner of 5th and 5th. And thank goodness, a late board member, she just passed away in the last year. Betty Schott Hart. She was the board treasurer at the time, and I was having a really difficult time. How do I memorize this address? Well, 440 East 5th Avenue North is the museum's address. She said, just remember the corner of 5th and 5th. And I have been grateful that she told me that from day one, because 2 weeks after I was at the museum, I heard this crash outside, and I had to call 911. And of course, by then I did not know 440 East 5th Avenue North. So I said, because the dispatcher said, "Where are you?" I says, "At the corner of 5th and 5th.
I mean, you could have just said,
The
"Go
museum.
outside and I'll yell to you."
Right.
I'm over here.
Yeah.
I mean, they would have heard you.
Right.
That was kind of like
But-
when we had the train crash, and I had to call 911, and I'm like, "There's been a train wreck?" And she's like, "Where?" And I'm like, "On the tracks." I don't know what to call that.
But that's
Yeah.
what's so
On the
frustrating
tracks.
about the way the town is, the streets are.
Yeah.
Because you look at the old maps and there's White and Hamilton, and too bad they didn't continue
those.
that and had the numbers going the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
It seems like they started in with this numbering system, but it's kind of like they kind of halfway did the job.
Right.
It's like, if you're going to do the numbering system, let's do the whole grid and let's everything's that way.
Yeah.
And that can work very well, right?
Right.
But then you've got just names of things. It's really mishmash and
Yeah.
like let's go ahead and throw a stop sign here, but not over here.
Right.
Or
well,
not
and now
here,
since
or-
they've changed the hospital, that road is weird because there's no stop signs going up the street where the old hospital is, because that's of the ambulance road, right?
yeah,
So
road,
no
yeah.
stop signs, except for until you get to that street, then there's a stop sign. Just like you said, it's just
Yeah.
weird.
And then Corey,
Corey.
for
Yep.
obvious reasons, that was where the railroad spur went up to
To the-
Corey.
They decided to keep Quarry, but not any of the rest of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and it had to have been, I would say, we'll have to look at the Sanborn fire insurance maps that we have. We have an original that was 1920, updated in 24 or something, and it's changed in that map. So.
And they also changed, like, at some point, they changed so the house that was across the street, Forrest Mandeville used to live there, across from the hospital. They changed where the entryway was on that door, or on that house. So,
to the side.
yeah. So
To the
then that
west.
address had to change.
Yeah.
There's just a lot
And
of...
that's an old church building, from what I understand.
It is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's a lot of interesting things, and, how things got changed. But I wish we still had Hamilton and White streets.
I do
instead
too.
of
I do
First and
too.
Second.
Well, and you could have done like...
And Allen. Oh, well, there is Allen.
there is Allen.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could have done like, north-south streets be this, or east-west streets be this,
Right.
and kept but they didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have numbered whatever you wanted,
Right.
but
Well,
They
Google has trouble, evidently, with the museum location, because people end up on the west end of town and they realize, oh, we're not in the right
well,
area
Centennial
at
is
all.
another hard one
Yeah.
because it doesn't. It kind of continues down an alley. And
Yeah.
then-
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I don't want to get in trouble for taking up too much more of your time this morning, Penny, but this has been a real good treat on these. I could keep going. We could just keep going talking about all these guys. It's my favorite subject. So very interesting stuff, and we'll have to dip back into some of these guys again, because there's just so much more information. And William White, like, I need to get into that book there. There's so much more there that I don't even know about.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating book. It's one of the books that came from the library that I told her, you can't be checking this out anymore.
Yeah.
This is a very rare book. It's hard to...
Especially when you have like 200. What did you say? 200 copies or?
Well, that's Alan's book. It's 200. I don't know how many were printed of this.
The other one, I did find the other one on Amazon, and
This one, Custer Calvary and Crows?
yes, and it's not. I mean, like, there were some couple of sellers between $40 something and $80.
Well, you said it's not in print anymore. So
No.
Yeah.
how did they decide to stop printing? I don't. If you wanted to print more, you could. I don't like. What is that? How does that work?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
I guess they just decide, let's print a run. They pick a number, and then based on demand, do we do another run on that? I guess. I don't know. It's interesting.
So, Penny, can you tell us your hours at the museum now? Because you're switching over, right? Or maybe
Not till
you're-
January. We're
Okay.
still open Monday through Friday, 10 to 5. We include Saturdays, Memorial Day through Labor Day, 11 to 3. And in January, we'll go to Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from 10 to 3. However, that doesn't mean you can't get in the museum off hours. It's by appointment, too, because I'm still there Mondays and Fridays.
Oh, wow.
So
Shouldn't have told me that.
just come ring the doorbell.
I will.
Or
I
text
will.
me.
No.
What? There's still stuff to do at a museum?
No, that's awesome. I really do appreciate this. Also appreciate you, Donna. Pinnacle Property is making this possible. Pinnacle Property of Montana. And these are fun little features. I'm learning a ton. And,
Yes. Thank you, Donna.
Yeah.
Yep, these are going to be fun. All right, thanks. We'll do it again soon. This episode of the Big Fat Podcast in our They Gazed on the Beartooths series was brought to you by Pinnacle Property of Montana. Let Pinnacle Property of Montana help you make your Montana dream come true. Their contact information is below in the description. You can show your support by hitting that like button, subscribing if you haven't already, and sharing this episode with your history-loving friends. We'll see you next time.